Councillor for Cullercoats Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Trish Brady.
Councillor Trish Brady, Deputy Chair of the Committee.
Thank you. Councillor Brian Burdis.
Councillor Brian Burdis for Valley Ward.
Thanks. Councillor Linda Dark.
Councillor Linda Dark from Kilnworth Ward.
Thanks, Linda. Councillor Sandra Graham.
Morning, Chair. Sandra Graham, Whitley Bay Ward.
Morning. Councillor Muriel Green.
Morning, Councillor Muriel Green, Wheatslade Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Richardson.
Yeah, good morning. Hello, Councillor Paul Richardson, Muncie North.
Thank you. Councillor John Sterling. Councillor Francis Wheatman.
Hello, I'm Councillor Francis Wheatman and I represent Tynemouth Ward.
Thank you. Now also present online are the following officers. I'll invite them each to introduce themselves.
You forgot me.
I beg your pardon, Councillor Samuel.
Yes. Councillor Willie Samuel, Cullercoats Ward. Thank you very much.
Is this the second time I've done this?
Yes.
Sorry, that's not intentional.
I don't take it personally, don't worry.
Okay, I'll ask the officers to respond now when I call out their name. And again, if you can turn your microphone and camera on to introduce yourself. Julie Lawson.
Hello, sorry there, I had a bit of trouble opening my microphone, but Julie Lawson, planning.
Thank you. Aidan Dobinson Booth.
Good morning, Aidan Dobinson Booth, Principal Planning Officer.
Thank you. Dave McCall.
Thank you, Chair. Dave McCall, Highways Officer.
Thank you. Do we have Claire Wilson or is it Francis McLean?
McLean. Hello, it's Francis McLean, Environment Health Group Leader.
Thank you. Tessa Crow.
Good morning, everybody. Legal Advisor.
Thank you. And finally, Michael Robson.
Morning, everyone. Michael Robson, Clerk of the Committee.
Thanks very much for that. Now, we've also got other officers joining the meeting to provide technical support and to cover in the event of connections being lost. Just to ensure the meeting runs smoothly, can I remind people taking part to turn off the microphone and camera when you're not speaking. Only speak when you're invited to do so, and activate your microphone and camera before you begin speaking. If any member or officer wishes to speak, please use the hand raised button or alternatively the chat facility. If both of those fail, feel free to interrupt. If referring to any specific points in a report, can you please specify the page number? And if any participant's connection to the meeting is lost, we'll adjourn the meeting for a short period of time to allow the connection to be restored. We can now move on to the formal business as set out in the agenda. Item 1 is apologies. Do you have any apologies?
None that I'm aware of, Chair.
Thank you. So therefore we have no substitute members. Item 3, can I invite members, committee members who have any interests that they would like to declare in relation to items on the agenda? Can you do so now? There are none. And item 4, the minutes of the last meeting were asked to confirm as a correct record the minutes of the last meeting held on the 4th of August. Unless any member now indicates otherwise, I'll take it that the minutes are confirmed.
Agreed.
Thank you for that. There are no raised hands. So now we move on to give consideration to planning applications. and in doing so, members are asked to have regard to the guidance set out in item 5, that's pages 9 to 14 of the agenda papers. And so we move on to the actual planning applications, the first one of which is item 6, land adjacent to Hatfield House.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I'll be presenting this one. I'm just going to go on to the presentation and share that with you. Just bear with me one moment. Does that come up, Julia? So, no. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Just while the officers are setting that up, can I just ensure that all members have received the addenda to the committee papers dated the 28th of August. If anyone hasn't received these addenda, please indicate. Right, that appears to be okay. If you're ready, Aidan.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Chair. So item 6, which is land adjacent to Hatfield House, Borough Road, North Shields. The proposal is for the erection of 6 3-storey townhouse style terrace dwellings with communal parking and rear amenity space. The application site is a steeped grassed embankment between Borough Road and Tennyson Terrace to the south of the North Shields town centre. The site is within the New Quay Conservation Area, and the Grade 2 listed Old Customs House is to the southeast. And here is an aerial view, and as you can see, there's a number of trees and dense scrub that currently sit on the site. And there's just another view of the site. So there it is. Okay, and this is from street level. So again, this is the site here. Okay. The main issue for members to consider are principle, 5-year housing land supply, character and appearance, impact on amenity, highway safety, biodiversity, and open space. There have been 16 objections and 1 letter of comment. An addendum was circulated last week, setting out the comments from the Council's biodiversity officer, confirming that no further BAT information is required. Biodiversity officer also objects to the development on the grounds of loss of habitat and trees. Moving on now to the issue of principle, whilst the site is not an allocated housing site in the local plan, it is in a sustainable location on the periphery of North Shields town centre. Officers consider the principle of residential development on this site to be acceptable, and members need to decide whether they agree. Moving on now to the issue of 5-year housing land supply. The council does have a 5-year housing land supply. However, this is a minimum and not a maximum, and further planning permissions that add to the supply of housing can be granted, which further add to that supply. In terms of character and appearance, officers consider that the contemporary design is acceptable, but would not detract from the character and appearance of the New Quay Conservation Area or the Old Customs House, which is Grade 2 listed. Members need to consider whether they agree. In terms of impact on amenity, the proposed dwellings would meet the nationally described space standards, ensuring an acceptable standard of living environment for future occupiers. Officers consider the proposal would not adversely affect the amenity of surrounding occupiers, and members need to consider whether they agree. Highway safety. The highway network manager has been consulted and recommends conditional approval. Officers consider that the proposal is acceptable in terms of highway safety and parking, subject to conditions, and members need to also consider whether they agree. As mentioned earlier, the biodiversity officer objects. He says that the proposal will result in the loss of between 800 to 1,000 square metres of dense scrub and tree habitat that provides habitat for nesting birds and small mammals, as well as foraging bats. 8 good quality native trees, that's categories A and B, would also be lost. There is no mitigation. The proposed block plans show green roofs proposed, but these are unlikely to mitigate for the loss of breeding bird habitat and the trees. The council's landscape architect also objects, saying that the scheme does not retain any existing landscape features, offers no new planting as mitigation other than the green roofs, and provides limited front garden space that offers no landscape amenity at ground level. Other matters, in terms of land contamination, the council's contaminated land officer does not object, subject to conditions. Therefore, in conclusion, this is a balance of issues for members. The proposed development would be in keeping with the surrounding area. Whilst the proposal would result in development within a wildlife corridor, this in itself is not uncommon. It would, however, result in the loss of up to 1,000 square metres of dense scrub and also trees, including 8 good quality native trees. This weighs against the proposal. However, it would provide additional housing that would make a small but welcome contribution to the housing land supply. Planning officers consider it acceptable in terms of its impact on residential amenity, character and appearance of the new key conservation area, and also a highway network. Therefore, on balance, it is recommended that planning permission should be granted subject to a Section 106 legal agreement to secure the necessary coastal mitigation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Aidan. In accordance with the Council's temporary speaking rights scheme, Carol Hawkins of Vicarage Street, North Shields, was granted permission to submit a written statement to the committee in relation to this application. However, Ms Hawkins has not responded to the invitation. No statement's been received. So I'm now inclined to open it up to questions of officers. And before I bring Ken Barry in, can I ask a question I think I might have asked before? Has there been any ground survey done to assess the stability of the bank sides?
In terms of the surveys that they've carried out, they have carried out a contaminated land survey, which just recommends mitigation and conditions. So yes, they have looked at it. I mean, yes, obviously, given it's a sloped site, it's a challenging site from that point of view, but it's not. It can sort of be done with the right construction techniques and build methods. So yes, subject to conditions, that shouldn't in itself pose a problem. What I would also say is that the Environmental Health Officer has reminded me that in terms of the conditions that are set out, it doesn't include the working hours condition, which is HOU 04. So again, with your permission, Chair, if the committee are minded to grant and approve this application, it would also be subject to that additional condition, which just controls the construction hours. So those construction hours are 8 in the morning till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, and 8 o'clock in the morning till I think it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday, with no workings on Sundays or bank holidays. Thank you.
Right. If the clerk to the committee can record that as an additional condition. Can I ask, Aidan, are you quite confident about the stability of the bank when the excavation work starts, such that Tennyson Terrace houses aren't going to fall in? Because there's a history of bank instability in this area. I
mean, to be honest, Chair, I'm not an expert in those matters. I can only go by the sort of the technical documents that have been produced. There's nothing on the face of it that springs up and causes a problem. But I mean, you're right. They will have to obviously carry out detailed investigations and ensure that the build that they do doesn't have an adverse impact on kind of other properties. But yes, so it's beyond my sort of area of expertise to rule it out definitively. But you would hope that any developer would be particularly careful of that, given that the likely implications that it would cause.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barry.
Just backing up what you said there, Frank, could you ask the legal if something seriously does happen, will this planning committee be responsible for that?
Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, thank you, Tessa.
The planning committee wouldn't be responsible for it. It would be up to the developer to ensure that, as Aidan said, any technical documents are produced and there's some detailed land surveys are carried out before any work was commenced.
Thank you. Councillor Barry, are you satisfied?
That satisfies me on that question. I've got a few more.
Carry on.
It says on page 27, 15.1, about a coal mining risk assessment. Is that required in this area, and has it been done?
Thank you. Yes, just looking at page 27 of the report. So it's probably worthwhile just sort of dwelling on this, given that the questions that we've had so far. So I'll just read it. So paragraph 178 of National Planning Policy Framework states that planning policies and decisions should ensure that a site is suitable for its proposed use, taking account of ground conditions and any risks arising from land instability and contamination, mining or land remediation. Paragraph 179 goes on to state that where a site is affected by contamination or land stability, issues and responsibility for securing a safe development rests with the developer and or landowner. So that goes to the issue of whether the committee would be responsible or not. The answer is no. In addition, National Planning Policy Guidance makes it clear that planning applications in defined coal mining high-risk areas must be accompanied by coal mining risk assessment. So, moving on, I'm at paragraph 15.3 now on page 28. The Contaminated Land Officer has reviewed the submitted plans and documents and recommends conditional approval with conditions for further investigation and mitigation measures. Now, on the issue of coal mining and the sort of legacy risks, it's worth bearing in mind that essentially the entire borough is affected in one way or another by sort of coal mining legacy, and the borough is sort of defined into two areas. One is where we have what we call standing advice that says that there's a low risk, but people need to be aware of it, and other areas where there's a high risk. It shouldn't be a problem to build, and indeed large portions of the borough are indeed built on areas that are in high risk. It just means that you need to take extra precautions. You need to be careful with the build when you're doing that. It may be that you need to add extra grout to foundations or other sort of technical solutions. So the fact it's a coal mining sort of high risk area doesn't preclude it from development.
You indicated you have further questions. Well, in the absence, can I bring in Councillor Samuel?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just looking through the objections, I mean, obviously we don't know details what the objections are, but there seems to be an awful lot in one way or another around about the Borough Road Bridge, which obviously is a separate planning application which we dealt with before. So I would disregard in some ways the one just saying we don't want the bridge to disappear. But some of them are talking about the the impact of the demolition of the bridge and other kind of impacts of the bridge upon this development. So I just wondered if there was any particular comments on that from officers.
Yes, thank you for that. It's really just to sort of reiterate what you actually said, Councillor, in the early part of that question, just to say that they are independent, they're not linked in any way, and either or of them can sort of take place without the other one. So from that point of view, so yes, I appreciate that a lot of the objections do relate to the loss of the bridge, but as you say, that was a matter that's been considered at length previously by this committee.
Okay, which answers what I'm saying in part, but I'm still unsure from reading through the report as to whether the demolition itself would impact upon this development, and is it, this may something to do with the timing or anything like that. Will the bridge be removed before the application goes ahead, that kind of thing? And really, secondly, some of them, I can't see what they're actually saying, but the continuing existence of the bridge seems to impact on what is happening, etc. Again, without seeing the text of these particular objections, I'm not sure where they're going. So really, I mean, I suppose the first point would be, will this application be not go ahead until such times as the bridge is not there? Possible it could be developed and then the bridge is still there. You see what I mean?
Yeah. There's, as I say, they are independent, so they can happen without each other. Probably, you're right. In practice, I would imagine, and if I was the developer on this, I would probably want to sort of hold fire until the bridge has been demolished and then construct my site. But that's a sort of matter between the developer and then whoever wants to obviously demolish the bridge. But the important thing is, as you said, that essentially that they are unlinked and can happen without each other.
Okay, I'll leave it for the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Muriel Green.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask about the gradient and the design when you're talking about the preparation on page 16. The gradient must vary in different parts of the bank side there, and it's almost like one of these upside down houses where you go out the bedroom to get into the patio. Yes, that's the one. Yes, yes. I'm trying to visualize this. Do we actually have any similar in the borough? I'm thinking of the ones perhaps in Cullercoats, where you go down from the big white house, where you're going down to the marine laboratory area. Are they the sort of similar type of design to it? Because these are 3-story townhouses, and almost to me they look to be very tall and almost too tall. But it's design I'm looking at, please. Right. Okay. And gradient. What's the gradient from the first house to the bottom house, please?
I don't have the detailed measurement of that. All I can probably say is that I think you're right in terms of, if you look at the slope from it, this kind of shows the slope there. So you're right, it is quite steep, and it's quite a challenging site, because again, if I bring to the end of it, again, you can see in terms of the slope in terms of the bank side there, from the ground level at the bottom to the ground level at the top. So in effect, you've got it kind of sloping in two different directions, which makes it particularly challenging. I'm not sure, I can't think of any examples off the top of my head in where we've got this in the borough. But I mean, the developers obviously come forward. They're confident that that they can achieve this, and they can build it. But I think you're right in terms of, because you've got that particular, you've got it effectively sort of sloping in two directions, haven't you? You've got slope there, and then you've got sloping back towards Tennyson Terrace and those houses there. That yes, you've got the sort of the 3-story townhouses, because the site sort of leads itself to using it in that way. And that's what you've got. But yes, I don't know the exact gradient, but obviously I can show you to a certain extent if I go back. Right. That again, there you do get a sense of the steepness of the bank there, and then again there, and again you can see difference in terms of height there. So you've got similar buildings built there. And again, that gives you a sense in terms of the overall steepness.
Can you also talk about the, we talked before Christmas about the size of the rooms and things. I mean, are we talking about minimum sized rooms again, or is there a development, an opportunity to make them a bit bigger? Again, I'm looking at the long, thin, narrow dwellings, and also the type of material that has been suggested that they use. Is it in keeping with anything else in the area? The material that's being used, suggested.
Yeah, okay. Certainly in terms of the space standards, the properties would all meet the nationally described space standards. So that's what they're required to do, and they do meet that. So in terms of that test, that test is passed. Now I'll just go on to the materials. Just bear with me. Right, okay. Yeah, I'm on page 21, and it's paragraph 10.11. So, and I'll just read from the report. It says, the applicant has provided indicative materials on the proposed plans, including the ground floor would have a dark grey or brown brick, with light grey first and second floor with white mortar, with grey brown or stroke brown powder-coated aluminium windows and balustrade. So each floor would be served by tall and wide windows in the front elevation. So, and then if I just go on to the next paragraph, which is 10.12, it says, it's the view of officers that the contemporary design, so that's certainly what it would be, and the massing of the proposed development is acceptable in terms of its siting, and the proposal would not detract from the character and appearance of the conservation area or the neighbouring Grade 2 listed old customs house. And as such, the proposal is considered to comply with the relevant planning policy. So yes, it would be modern and contemporary, but often that's the right approach within a conservation area, because you want to try and avoid something which is pastiche. And the advice generally from the conservation officer would be, what you want is a building that's quite clearly 2020, that you can look at it and you can see that it was built then and it fits in with the surrounding conservation area, and that it's clear and it's not trying to be something that it's not.
Thank you, Aidan.
Okay, thank you. Can I bring in Councillor Trish Brady, please?
Thank you, Chair. Interested to hear some of those comments, because those are some of the questions that I would raise as well. Two things. One is, will the pier that's holding the bridge up, will that be removed as well? Because presumably the wall, the retaining wall of that grassland, of that part of the scrubland is going as well.
Yes, the pier would be removed.
Have you got because it's this little parcel of land is part of the wildlife corridor, is that correct? Do you have a diagram that shows where it fits in with that, Aidan?
Yes, you're right. It is part of a wildlife corridor. If you bear with me, I can bring up a copy of the local plan, and I can show you on the local plan the wildlife corridor. But it'll just take me a couple of minutes to get the relevant bit. But yes, I'm quite happy to do it, and I can bring it up for you. So if you just bear with me, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll go and find it, and then I'll come back to you.
Councillor Lott, sorry to interrupt, it's Jackie Palmer here. Just while Aidan was looking for documents, I just wondered if it was useful to give an update on the position with the bridge.
Well, it may be helpful, yes.
So just to remind the planning committee that obviously they considered the application made by the council to demolish the bridge some months ago. And I think the timing of this application did lead to some additional objections because the public perception, although as Aidan has explained, the two applications were completely unrelated. The timing of the submission of this application, I think, kind of led to some objections that there was some sort of relationship between the two schemes. If you recall, though, that notwithstanding the fact that planning permission was granted to demolish the bridge, that there's a further process to be gone through before the bridge could be demolished, and that's because it's a public right of way and therefore it would need to be closed before that demolition could take place. So that's a process that's underway. I don't have any timetable for how long that process might take, and clearly at the end of that it may still be the case that the closure of the right of way isn't agreed. But if it is, then obviously the council can implement the permission to demolish the bridge. The developer on all of their plans for the housing scheme have, I think, assumed that the bridge would remain. You can see on all the drawings that Aidan's been showing you that the bridge, you know, they've built around the bridge effectively. So it seems, it would seem likely in terms of the timescales. You've got potentially, if the permission is granted for the housing, they've got 3 years to implement, so they may sort of move on and as they've designed the scheme to build around the bridge. Now, actually, the bridge abutments would remain. So even if the bridge is demolished, the council's intention was to remove the bridge span, but leave the abutments in situ. They don't. The land where the abutments are is in the council's control, not the applicants. So that there would have to be some negotiation if the circumstances were to change there. But certainly the applicant appears to have worked on the basis that the bridge would be in situ, and they're aware that when they do this detailed site investigation that Aidan's referred to, that they would need to be looking potentially at measures to use soil nails and wall ties and perhaps underpin the foundations of the bridge abutment that they would build around. But there's no timescale for the demolition of the bridge. So as I say, I think it was just to point out that they have made the plans show the bridge would remain, that they've built on the basis the bridge would remain in situ. I don't know if that helps, but I appreciate that there were some questions around that.
Well, at least it is informative. Thanks very much, Jackie.
Okay.
Thank you. Aidan, are you ready to resume?
Yes, thank you very much for that. So hopefully you can see this is an extract from the local plan proposals map, and what you can see is the sites in here, and this is the existing bridge. Now, in terms of what the planning officers are saying is essentially the wildlife corridor as it stands, it runs all the way along here, along sort of the Clive Street and things. Now, what it does is, because obviously this is an existing sort of dense area of scrub and trees, effectively it sort of extends upwards into this part. But really, after that, it doesn't really go anywhere. Because there isn't any room to go. So I think that's the basis on which we're saying that we don't think, despite the objections from the biodiversity officer and the landscape officer, that on balance, we think that essentially the main function of the wildlife corridor is that sort of route along there, that's still maintained. So hopefully that explains a little bit better in terms of where the wildlife corridor goes.
Okay, thanks, Aidan. Trish, have you any further questions?
No, thank you. Thanks, Aidan.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Willie Samuel, your hand's still up, or is it up again?
Sorry, I'll take it down.
Oh. And Councillor Barry, do you have a further question?
Yes, Chair, I have. On page 31, paragraph 13, it says no part of the development shall be occupied until a scheme to manage the parking has been submitted. It says on page 37 in 3.3, the application is to develop the storey building. An off-road parking area has been proposed. So is there a parking scheme?
I think that's referred to in the papers. The parking scheme is on the lower piece of grassland that we've just been looking at. That it's just gone off the screen. Aidan, can you help us there?
Yes, I can. The proposed parking, you can just see it very sort of faintly there, but that's where the parking would be. So there's the bridge, and that would be where the parking would be, just to the bottom there. So yes, there is a parking scheme, and that's where it would be. If you can just see that's a little bit faint, but that's where it is.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Paul Richardson.
Hello, thanks, Chair. Just to go back to the bridge, I hope briefly, just comments we just had about I appreciate they're separate issues and separate permissions, but just going back to the comments, the really helpful comments about the plan to build, effectively this building will be around the bridge. And whilst it's not clear about the chronology of the different applications, if the development were to go ahead, is it then practical to remove the bridge once this has been built?
Angela, the council was removing the bridge span. I think that was already quite, from a sort of engineering standpoint, a difficult task because of the constraints of the area. To be honest, I haven't got a specific response in terms of whether this development would make it more difficult, but in fairness, that's not really a planning issue for consideration of this application. But as I say, because the abutments were to remain in place, so the work to demolish the bridge is simply to remove the span, which would take place presumably kind of at the top of the bank sides and with some sorts of temporary road closures in place to allow its removal. So I don't think it would be significantly impacted if this site were to be developed, but there'd obviously need to be coordination if those two things were to happen in the same time frame.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, thanks. Councillor Brady, your hand's up.
Sorry, Chair, I'll take it down.
Oh. Right, I'm sorry about this. I'm trying to read all sorts of messages that keep popping up on the screen, but I think that's concluded our questions. Can I invite members to comment on the merits of the application, please? Councillor Burdis.
Thank you, Chair. I cannot support this application, principally on the grounds of the loss of 1,000 metres of extremely valuable habitat within North Shields. The officer said that they thought it was okay that that they could lose that habitat because it was an end of a corridor that wasn't going anywhere. It's not a question of an end of a corridor going anywhere. This is a depletion of 1,000 square metres of prime habitat for small mammals, as it's being identified by the biodiversity officer, and nesting for birds. There's very, very little habitat within North Shields now left for wildlife. And if we look at the North Shields plan, we're also part of that habitat along the quayside is also going to be reinstated. Not reinstated. It's going to be taken away through all these new trackways down to the quay. So I think this is just the beginning of a wedge on the loss of habitat within North Shields, important habitat being near the river, especially for birds and the animals. So I will not be supporting this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Samuel.
Yeah, so I'm also troubled by the issues that Councillor Burdis has just referred to. I mean, I always are generally troubled by departures from local plan anyway, but I suppose that is the reason we have this committee to discuss these kind of things. But I am also troubled, though not necessarily so much that, because I realise that the bridge demolition and this application are separate issues. I am troubled, I have to say, by the overlap. And if there was to go ahead, and then subsequent to this development happening, if the Borough Bridge was to be demolished at a later date, I appreciate that it's only parts of it that will go. But as I say, I'll just say I'm troubled at this point in time, but I'm listening to other people's points of view just now.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barry.
I can't support this application because what's worrying me is exactly what the chairman said earlier on. I'm not convinced that when they start digging into that embankment, it won't weaken the integrity of the structure behind, which supports those houses. And as a result of that, I won't be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Barry. Councillor Brady.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I also have some concerns about the land stability, given that there isn't any plan to have a specific shoring up of that area. But I specifically agree with Councillor Burgess about the loss of habitat. I think that we tend to overlook it because it's scrubland, but it does provide a very significant habitat for birds and small mammals, and also going forward for carbon sequestration. So I think we can't overlook that, and the fact that it's not, normally I'm in favour of these interstitial plots for housing, but I think it's a small number of houses and it won't have an impact on the overall housing availability in the borough. So I'm not going to support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. I concur with the last two. There are two reasons. One is the impact on diversity and open space, and the other is the design and impact on the character and appearance of the site and the new key conservation area. I'm not convinced that putting 6 houses perched on that particular ledge is actually going to be something that we can accept in that particular area. I have concerns about the gradients, but I think mostly I share the concerns about the loss of the biodiversity. It's absolutely vital that we keep as much of the green open spaces in these areas as we possibly can.
Thank you for that. I don't think any other member has indicated they wish to comment, although I'll add my comments in support of those that have already been expressed. Apart from my concerns about the bankside stability, and despite the fact that part of this site is an eyesore and has been for decades, I can't support this application on the grounds of its impact on trees, ecology and biodiversity. After the vote, and if the vote is to refuse the application, I'll ask members to add any additional grounds for their objections, but they are mine. So if there are no further comments, sorry, I've got 3 people indicating they wish to speak. Councillor Burgess? Is that an old hand? Councillor Samuel?
That's an old hand. I didn't realise it was up. Sorry, I'll take it down.
Okay, and Councillor Barry, do you wish to speak again?
That was an old hand.
Right, thank you. Can we please take our hands down once we have spoken? We're going to move to the vote now. The officer recommendation is set out on page 29, and in brief summary, it is to indicate that the committee is minded to grant the application. I think you've all got the full recommendation in front of you. I'll now invite our clerk, Michael, to call out the name of each member of the committee present. When your name's called, can you please state clearly whether you are for or against the officer recommendation? And once the vote's concluded, we'll announce the result. Okay, Michael, over to you.
Councillor Barry?
Against.
Councillor Brady?
Against.
Councillor Burgess?
Against.
Councillor Dark?
Against.
Councillor Graham?
Against.
Councillor Green?
Against.
Councillor Lott.
Against.
Councillor Richardson.
Against.
Councillor Samuel.
Against.
Councillor Wheatman.
Against.
That's unanimously against the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Can I invite members to add any additional reasons based on planning grounds for refusal to the ones that are listed before?
Chair, if I could just come in, I've kind of drafted from the debate and discussion that members had there. I've principally got 3 reasons, and if I just sort of run those by you briefly, and then if members have got any others that they wish to add, then perhaps they could indicate.
Carry on.
So I've got first one is loss of habitat, essentially, in terms of impact on trees, ecology, and biodiversity. Second reason, insufficient information in terms of on land stability, prove that the site can be developed in a safe manner. And thirdly, I've got an adverse impact upon the character and appearance of the new key conservation area.
Thank you for that. Councillor Green, do you wish to add?
No, I was just going to say, don't forget that one.
No, well, he didn't. Right, no one else has indicated, so they are the committee's grounds for refusing this application. Thank you very much for that. Can we move on to page 41, item 7, the site of the former NHS flats on Rake Lane?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, this is for the erection of a new discount food store with new access, an associated car park and landscaping. The application site is to the east of North Tyneside General Hospital entrance roundabout and to the south of Rake Lane. The site has a section of designated open space to the northwest corner. I'm just indicating where the open space is there. When you want a Google Earth image as well, you can see it there. That's the the designated area of open space, with the southern half of the site being previously developed land. It's also allocated for up to 10 units in the local plan. The main issue for members to consider are principle, whether there are any sequentially preferable sites, parking and highway safety, residential amenity, character and appearance, loss of open space, impact on biodiversity, and other matters. There have been 14 objections and 29 letters of support. So moving on to the issue of principle, the proposed retail store will be located on part of what is a previously developed site in close proximity to an established residential area. Good access to bus routes as well. As such, the proposal would be a sustainable location and would also provide the equivalent of 40 full-time jobs. It would have a low impact on existing town centres, no more than 3.6%. The biggest impact would be on existing out-of-centre retailers, but these are not protected by planning policy. It's the view of officers that the principle of development is acceptable and members need to consider whether they agree. Moving on now to the sequential test, although the proposal would have a small impact on existing centres, the sequential test requires that applicants look at town centre sites first, and only if there are no suitable, available or viable sites to then look at the edge of centre before finally considering out of centre sites. The applicant has carried out a sequential assessment looking at North Shields and Whitley Bay town centres, and also Preston Grange and Monkseaton district centres. However, there are no sites which are suitable, available and viable, and therefore it's officer advice the sequential test is passed. Members need to consider whether they agree. Impact on housing provision. So the proposal would result in the loss potentially of 10 units because they're allocated as such in the local plan. However, the council does have a 5-year housing land supply, and this small loss is considered would not have an adverse impact on the council's ability to deliver a 5-year housing land supply. Members need to consider whether they agree. Moving on now to parking and highway safety. Council's Highways Network Manager states that sufficient parking has been provided and that the submitted travel plan and transport assessment are acceptable. As such, he recommends conditional approval. Residential amenity. The Council's Environmental Health team has raised some concerns with the potential for noise impact of the proposed development given the proximity of Rosewood Close, but they do not object, subject to conditions. Character and appearance. The proposed buildings will be single-storey with monopitch roof and neutral colours and will be viewed within the context of the North Tyneside General Hospital and the nursery and care home, all within the vicinity of the site. Overall, it's considered the design of the proposed store is acceptable, but would not adversely affect the character or appearance of the surrounding area. Now, going back to the issue of the loss of open space now, the application site has a large grass verge to the western boundary of the site, again indicated there, that faces onto the Rake Lane roundabout. The existing verge is an embankment and not level, and therefore it has limited use beyond that of visual amenity. The grass verge, however, is allocated open space. The landscape and biodiversity officers initially objected to the loss of the open space, but the applicant has included a replacement area to the east of the proposed buildings, which is shown here. And officers consider that if members are minded to grant permission for this scheme, that they remove permitted development rights from this area of land to prevent any development taking place without first obtaining planning permission. Biodiversity. The site is also within a wildlife corridor, although most of the site is previously developed land. Subject to conditions for a revised landscaping plan, the proposal is considered acceptable in terms of its impact on ecology and biodiversity. And moving on now to contaminated land and flooding. The contaminated land officer has reviewed the submitted details and does not object, subject to conditions. The local lead flood authority also do not object, subject to conditions. The business and development team have requested a scheme of apprenticeships to be submitted, and the applicant is agreeable to this, and a condition is recommended to secure this. So in conclusion, proposed development would not have a significant impact on the character and appearance of the area and would provide 40 full-time equivalent jobs. It's officer advice that the proposed development is acceptable in terms of its impact on the existing town and district centres, residential amenity, character and appearance, biodiversity, and also highway safety. It is acknowledged that the proposal would result in the loss of a small allocated housing site. However, this would not have an adverse impact on the council's overall housing land supply. It's therefore recommended that planning permission is granted, subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Aidan. It's time for questions now. Councillor Burgess.
Thank you, Chair. It's just about the mini roundabout outside the site itself. That is on Rake Lane. That is heavily used, and you get backed up traffic on there now. Are there any plans to mitigate that, to actually enlarge the roundabout or put lights on or whatever? Because you've got 5 o'clock, you'll have everybody coming down from Newcastle from work, and you have the people leaving the hospital, then you have people coming up from Whitley Bay, the buses and all sorts. It is heavily used mini roundabout, as I see at the moment. With this shopping area, this will just exacerbate any problems that they have.
I think that's a question for Dave McCall, is it?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As part of the application, they did produce a transport assessment, and what I've done, I've got that looked at in a lot of detail by the team who's doing the modelling for the local plan. So we've basically looked at all the scenarios. So we've looked at the scenario if, say, none of the local plan went ahead, but in particular there's a live application to the the north of the site for some housing by Northumberland Estates. So we've looked at the scenario if that development doesn't go ahead and the mini roundabout is sufficient to cope with the development, but they've also looked at the scenario if that application is approved at some point in the future. And again, as part of the potential housing application, that roundabout is improved. So either way, it's been tested, and I think probably the main point I'll get from the report that was produced when it was analysed is that the queue length increases on the hospital and the supermarket access from 5.73 metres to 11.51 metres, which is basically a car length, a car and a half maybe. But actually, because there's more development traffic would be using the hospital leg, it actually balances the roundabout out. So the overall delays on all the legs when averaged out are slightly less because you're introducing more traffic to that site. So to summarise, it has been tested, and the two scenarios are no development to the north, the roundabout copes so that if the development to the north occurs, then the new roundabout copes with this site.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barry?
I'm just continuing in the same vein. My concern is when the traffic comes out there and they can't get round that mini roundabout, they will detour up past the hospital and come out at the top end. Now that's a very, very tight road going past the hospital. How are they going to stop it?
That won't be stopped. I mean, if people want to do that, they'll do that, and that'll be up for the hospital to manage. I mean, I'm not aware of any objections from the hospital, and this was their land originally, I believe. So, you know, that's something for them to manage. As far as the external highway network is concerned, we've tested that, and I've got no reasons to object to the application.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Samuel?
Thank you. I just wonder if you could expand a little bit there on the impact of should there be a development going ahead in Merton Gap, because obviously that would have a major impact on the kind of traffic, etc. Is there likely to be alterations to the road network that could impact that in the future? I mean, I don't know how much we could take that into account, but just I'd be interested in the comments.
There's a live application that came in about February 2019, which is still being determined, which looks at the local network. So their impact of Merton Gap will have a much wider impact on the network, and specifically to do with this junction. If that goes ahead, they will be upgrading that roundabout, the current mini roundabout. So just to really kind of emphasise what I said before, both scenarios have been tested. So if Merton Gap never happens, this supermarket has been tested on the network and is acceptable. If Merton Gap does happen with the additional improvements that proposes, again, the traffic associated with this site, the supermarket, has been run through that model. So all bases are covered in terms of traffic impact. And you know, my recommendation is approval on that basis.
Okay. Are you saying the roundabout, the main alteration would be the roundabout would be bigger, or is there other impacts like road extensions?
As part of the Merton Gap, or the current live application on Merton Gap, which is available to view online on the public access website, there is a proposal to upgrade that mini roundabout. And sorry, like to increase the diameter to make it a bigger roundabout, which will effectively change it from a 3-leg roundabout to 4 legs to include the new housing development.
Okay. I confess I haven't looked at the application, and I will do, but is that the only alteration that would happen?
I mean, there's wider alterations as far as Merton Gap, you know, Wheatsheaf, Red Line, roundabout, Urs and things like that, but on this area, to look at this supermarket site, that is the main alteration on there.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Ken Barry, is that an old hand or a new hand?
Sorry, it's an old hand.
Okay, thank you. No one else has indicated they wish to ask any questions, so can I invite comments, please? Councillor Barry.
I can see no objection to actually having the little there on planning regulations, but I still have serious concerns about that roundabout in Rake Lane and the fact that they'll rat run up past the hospital, and there's quite a few crossings all the way up there, and it's a very tight road. It's all right saying that, well, the Thumbie Healthcare Trust are going to have to look after that, but I'm still very, very concerned that this could be an accident happening.
Thank you. Councillor Burdis.
Thanks, Chair. I'm minded to go along with the recommendation on the proviso that we do secure that piece of land to the, I think it's to the south. That looks to the, yes, that area. That, yeah, as long as we secure that for future planning. Okay, that's it.
Thanks, Councillor Burdis. Can I just check with Aidan that that is conditioned?
Yes, Chair, it would be conditioned. So the condition, as I say, just seeks to remove the permitted development rights, which just means that, because obviously certain developers are given permitted development rights and they can do things without having to apply for planning permission. This provision means that anything they want to do on that land, they would need to come forward and apply for planning permission. So it gives the council the opportunity to control it. And then obviously, if we take a view that we want to keep it as open as green space, then we can do so.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson.
Thank you. My only comment, I'm inclined to support this. My only comment is that whilst on purely planning grounds, I think I appreciate that the test has to be against town centres and other sites. It just occurs to me, and other people have made the point to me, that there are a lot or an increasing amount of small to medium-sized supermarkets springing up outside the town centres, and there are several within relatively short distances of this. So I guess eventually, a sequential test, or I don't know what the terminology is, but it's all very well to take every individual case on its merits, but there has to be an aggregate impact at some stage. So that may be rather clumsily put. So I'll support this, but I think we need to bear in mind the plethora is too strong a word, but there are increasingly other small, medium-sized supermarkets springing up.
Yeah, I can see where your concern arises from. However, I think that argument was lost during the Margaret Thatcher government years.
Okay, no answer to that.
Okay, no one else has indicated they wish to speak. Councillor Barry's hand is up. Is this still up?
Sorry.
We'll move to the vote. Same as last time. The officer recommendation set out on page 60 is to approve the application subject to conditions. So, Michael, can you do the roll call, please? And Councillor Richardson, can you take your hand down?
Councillor Barry?
Against.
Councillor Brady?
For.
Councillor Burdis?
For.
Councillor Dark?
For.
Councillor Graham?
For.
Councillor Green?
For.
Councillor Lott?
For.
Councillor Richardson?
For.
Councillor Samuel?
For.
Councillor Wheatman?
For.
So that's approved 9 votes to 1, Chair.
Thank you for that. Am I switched on? Yes, I am. Thank you for that. That's approved. Can we now move to page 79, agenda item number 8, Backwith Park Primary School?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. This is a proposal to develop the site for executive homes comprising of 5 4-bedroom detached homes and 2 5-bedroom homes. There was an addendum that was circulated as well towards the end of last week. That included the comments from the council's public rights of way and siting officer, and also the conservation officer. It didn't raise anything new. The public rights of way and siting officer doesn't object subject to conditions. And again, the conservation officer was just was concerned about the use of materials, but considers the materials that are proposed to be acceptable in this case, and therefore all we've done is we've sought to vary the approved plans condition, which is condition 1, just to include the material details. So that was the addendum that was circulated on Friday. So the main issues for members to consider in terms of this report are, again, the principle, housing land supply, heritage and design, the impact on existing and future occupiers, parking and highway safety, trees, ecology and biodiversity, open space, contaminated land. So the description of the site, first of all, the application site refers to the former Backworth Park Primary School, which is accessed from the Station Road and is within the Backworth Conservation Area. The site has been cleared of the previous primary school buildings. It should be noted that the former primary school buildings were removed due to fire damage, which required their demolition. So moving on now to the principle of development. The application site is is previously developed site within the Backworth Conservation Area. It's not allocated for housing within the North Tyneside local plan, but that doesn't mean it precludes the site from being developed for residential purposes. The site is located within an existing village, close to local shops and services, and also close to public transport. As such, the proposal is considered to be a sustainably previously developed site. Therefore, having regard to the above, it's officer advice that the principle is acceptable and members need to consider whether they agree. Moving on to the 5-year housing land position, obviously the council does have a 5-year housing land supply, and this site is not identified as part of that supply. However, it would make a small and welcome contribution to the overall council land supply within the borough. Moving on now to heritage and design. It's the view of officers that the application layout, mass, density is reflective of other development in the area. There is also significant mature planning surrounding the site that limits the views of the site from the public realm, and also the listed building to the south. This ensures that the development would not have an adverse impact on the character or setting of Backworth Hall, which is grade 2 listed. It's acknowledged that the boundary wall of Backworth Hall runs along the southern boundary of the application site, and the proposal does include the repair of the wall. These repairs require listed building consent, which the applicant is aware, but the repair of the walls are not required prior to commencement of the development. The conservation officer has reviewed the submitted plans and supports the contemporary approach, subject to conditions to control the quality of the materials, and that's what I was referring to when I mentioned the addendum that was circulated towards the end of last week. So therefore, in terms of the character and appearance, officer advice, the proposal complies with the relevant policies in the local plan, and members need to consider whether they agree. Now moving on to the impact on the amenity of existing and future occupiers. As you can see from the screen, proposed dwellings will be sited on large detached plots and orientated so that none of the proposed dwellings would overlook any other dwellings, and therefore result in an acceptable outlook and amenity. The neighbouring housing site has 4 dwellings to the north, which are separated from the application site by a tall wall. It's the view of the officers that the siting of the entrance road along the north boundary, separation distance and the east-facing orientation of the northernmost proposed dwelling would ensure that the proposal would not have a detrimental impact upon existing dwellings. Having regards to that, it's the view of officers that the proposal is deemed to comply with the relevant policies, and members need to consider whether they agree. Moving on to parking and highway safety, the highway network manager has reviewed the submitted plans and has reviewed also the site access. He has recommended conditional approval. Moving on now to trees, ecology and biodiversity, the landscape architect has reviewed the submitted plans. There's no objection to the principle of the development. It's noted that the application site is enclosed by mature planting and that it's protected by a woodland tree preservation order. And as such, the landscape architect and biodiversity officer have listed a series of necessary conditions to ensure the health and protection of the trees throughout the construction phase of the development. The biodiversity officer has further recommended a series of conditions to ensure the development will have mitigation and protection measures in place for the construction phase of development to ensure that the construction of the proposed works would minimise the risk to local wildlife. The biodiversity officer has also recommended condition for bird and bat boxes, and that can be secured. Therefore, overall, officers consider that the proposal will be acceptable in terms of its impact on trees and biodiversity, and members need to consider whether they agree. Now, moving on to the issue of open space, the site is classified as an outdoor sports facility within the green space strategy. Now, that probably relates to the fact of its former use as a school. The current site could not be used as obviously an outdoor sports facility. As currently, it's just a cleared site. The overall condition of the site is now overgrown with cracked and uneven hard surfaces. The proposal does not offer any usable outdoor space. Moving on now to contaminated land. The contaminated land officer has no objection to the principle of development. However, they have recommended the imposition of further conditions, again for investigation and, where necessary, mitigation. In conclusion, therefore, members need to consider whether the proposal will impact on the adjoining properties, whether the occupants of the proposed dwellings will have a suitable level of residential amenity, whether the development would have an acceptable impact on the character and appearance of the Backworth Conservation Area, trees, biodiversity and highway network. The proposed development would be in keeping with the surrounding area, would improve the character and appearance of the previously developed former school site. The proposal would provide additional executive housing, which is currently in demand. It's officer advice that the proposed development is acceptable in terms of its impact and therefore recommended for approval. Now, if I could just briefly just say that obviously the recommendation before you at the moment is made to grant on the expiry of consultation. We have received the consultation responses from those that we were awaiting. So therefore, the recommendation is straight to permit. So it's permit subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Aidan. Questions now, Councillor Burgess.
Thank you, Chair. The entrance and the exits of that site is very narrow. We have the existing houses to the north, plus houses that are not on that, over here are on the northeast. There's a set of houses there that all use that that entrance and exit. At the moment, the zebra crossing near to the entrance and exit is not in a good condition. The Belisha beacons don't light up very well because they're always obscured by trees. The questions I'm raising, and what I would like to ask the highways officer, is there any way that we could mitigate, slow the traffic down to less than the 20 mile an hour there, maybe by putting a raised table in, something similar to what we've done up by the estate further to the south of the new estate further south, just to slow the traffic down there. Previous, when it was a school site, cars didn't really go in that area. People used to park across in the club, which is to the east there, and walk the kids across into the school. I just think that leaving the road the way it is, especially that zebra crossing, and not doing something to mitigate, to slow the traffic down, especially because of all this extra traffic. Maybe, okay, it's only 5 houses, but they are executive houses, so you're talking 10 cars minimum coming in and out during the day. I think something should be done on the outside there, maybe a raised table.
Okay, Dave, I accept that you can't give assurances at this meeting as part of this planning consideration, but I'm inviting you to comment on Councillor Burdis's question there.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, certainly it's something I can raise with the traffic team. I'm sure Councillor Burdis, being a ward councillor for that area, is well aware of all the historic issues with traffic and the various schemes that have been put in there in the past. Given the relatively small scale development, can't really attach to this application, but that's certainly something I can raise outside of this forum.
Okay, Councillor Barry.
Following on from Councillor Burdis, just how are they going to get the construction vehicles in there? Because as he said, it's very, very tight.
It's absolutely a problematic site to develop. I mean, the refuse vehicle does get in there at the moment to serve the existing dwellings and the school. There's conditions on the application for a construction management plan, which they'll have to adhere to. That'll include wheel washing as well, over and above the actual access point. But yeah, they'll have to demonstrate that they can get vehicles in there, turn them safely within the site. They'll need contractor parking, storage areas and all that kind of thing. So that should be covered by that condition.
Okay, thank you. No one else has indicated that they wish to ask a question. So can we move to comments, please? Councillor Barry.
I know there's no proper way of refusing on planning, but I'm erring on going against because I'm a bit concerned about that road and the road safety as indicated by Councillor Burdis.
Okay. Now, no one else has indicated that they wish to comment now. Could I just point out, Councillor Barry, your hand's still up. So we'll move to the vote. As Aidan did explain, the consultation period has now expired, or it's concluded, and it's a straightforward recommendation that permission be granted. So, Michael, can you take us through the vote, please?
Certainly. Councillor Barry.
Against.
Councillor Brady.
For.
Councillor Burdis.
For.
Councillor Dark.
For.
Councillor Graham.
For.
Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Lott.
For.
Councillor Richardson.
For.
Councillor Samuel.
For.
And Councillor Wheatman.
For.
That again is approved 9 votes to 1, Chair.
Right, thank you very much for that. That's approved. Can we now move to item 1011 East Farm Mews, a tree preservation order? No, sorry, I'm wrong. It's Sterling Farmer, item 9. Page 113.
Hello, sorry, yes, my microphone was again taking a little wee bit of time to turn on then.
Okay.
I'll let Aidan do the slides. Yeah. Right, thank you. The application relates to the Sterling Pharma Solutions site at Dudley, which comprises a complex of industrial buildings of varying heights and designs. Next slide, please. This just shows the overall site layout and some of the adjoining properties. Next slide, please. To the west of the site is a railway line with open agricultural land beyond. That agricultural land is designated as Greenbelt. To the north of the site are some existing commercial units. And opposite the plant to the east across Dudley Lane, there's some residential dwellings, which are all down the eastern side there. And to the south is an existing industrial site. And the main entrance to the site is from Dudley Lane. Next slide, please. That just shows an aerial view of the main element of the proposed works at the southern end of the site. So that's as existing. Next slide, please. This shows the existing site plan on the left and the proposed site plan on the right. So the proposal is relates to the existing wastewater treatment plant, which is known as a bio plant. Planning permission is sought for the construction of additional pre-treatment steps to be integrated into the existing on-site biological effluent treatment plant. The proposed changes in the biological treatment process include some additional enclosed tanks that will pre-treat the existing wastewater at the site before it flows into the existing bio plant for treatment. And the additional process steps will accept the same materials currently treated by the bio plant and treat them by a controlled process in enclosed tanks that contain naturally occurring microorganisms. And this additional step will generate the renewable gas biomethane, which will then be fed into the existing natural gas distribution network. And the biomethane fed into the gas network will reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with the consumption of natural gas. Next slide, please. We've got a few slides showing some elevations. The proposed development will be integrated into the existing bio plant, and it will incorporate some additional tanks and containerized equipment around the bio plant and some ancillary pipework. So on this slide, in the grey bits are the existing ones and the red bits are the proposed ones, which just show some of the tanks. So the proposal includes 4 reception tanks, which are 8 metres high, which are more in the central area, numbers 3 there. And 3 enclosed recirculation tanks, which are 15 metres high, and 3 anaerobic reactor tanks, which are 17.5 metres high, and those are items 5 and 6 on the slide there. And also an odour abatement system and a biodome, which is 10 metres high, and some other structures as well, including a greenhouse to the east of the existing plant. Next slide, please. It just shows you the south elevation. And next slide, and that's just the east and west elevations. And if we go on to the next slide, please, and just hold on that one, that shows a 3-dimensional representation of the proposed alterations. So you can see the green in the centre there, and just beyond, just on the northern corner there, the tanks I was mentioning and some of the other structures around that. The applicant has advised that the benefits of the proposal include enclosed tanks to minimise odour potential, reduce traffic movements of effluents from the site, renewable energy generation, contributing to climate change targets, and new investment in the facility. And the main issues relate to the principle of the development, impact on amenity, impact on character and appearance, and highway safety and ecology. In terms of the principle, the site's in a designated employment site, and the development will be located within this site, and given that it would improve an existing bioplant operation, it's considered appropriate to its location. And the applicant, as advised, has already mentioned that the works will reduce the environmental impact of the site. And the applicant has set out several benefits linked to this development, and those are set out in the agenda, so I won't repeat those all here. It would obviously utilise an existing industrial site, and it's also advised that the principle of the proposed development is considered to be acceptable. In terms of impact on amenity, specifically noise and air quality, a noise assessment and air quality assessment have been submitted, and Environmental Health have confirmed that the assessment has determined, the air quality assessment has determined that the operational results arising from the proposed development will not result in air quality impacts to have a significant adverse impact on air quality, because the process involves the use of enclosed tanks. In terms of noise, the assessment shows that the external plant, when operational, does not exceed the existing background noise levels. Several conditions are recommended, though, to deal with these issues further. In terms of impact on character and appearance, except for the buried pipeline which extends largely along the eastern boundary of the site, all of the proposed works will be contained within the southern part of the site, in this area that's shown on the slide there. To the nearest residential properties to this part of the site are on Greaves Row, which is approximately 100 metres to the east. Views into the site from these properties are restricted by the existing vegetation along the eastern boundary. The proposed tanks would be in keeping with the scale and mass of the existing buildings and structures within the wider site. And when viewed from outside the site, it would be seen in the context of the existing overall site. The existing belt of mature landscaping along the eastern boundary of the site would soften the visual impact of the development, and it's also not considered that the development would harm the characteristics of the green belt, which is to the west of the site. In terms of highway safety, the Highways Network Manager has advised that the site access and internal circulation remains unchanged, so he has no objections, subject to conditions. In terms of ecology, next slide, please. This is a planting plan. You can see just that large area in the red line at the southern end there, with the items in blue there, the tanks, etc., and also the blue line which runs along the eastern boundary, extending up to the north of the site, and also the trees. The grey areas along that eastern boundary are trees. The biodiversity officer has considered a submitted ecological appraisal, and a wildlife corridor is located to the southwest of the wider site and a section of its eastern boundary. Most of the prominent landscape features are sited around the perimeter of the site and with the more open aspects to the south. And the recommendations set out within the ecological appraisal can be conditioned. In terms of the proposed buried gas pipeline, which will extend from the bioplant along the eastern perimeter to connect to the grid further north, there are only 2 trees required to be removed along the eastern perimeter to facilitate this part of the development, and these will be replaced by 6 heavy standard trees planted along the verge of the eastern boundary. And further information is proposed under conditions to control any potential further impact on trees. We've set out the Health and Safety Executive has no objections to the proposal, and it's considered that the view of officers that the proposed development is acceptable and approval is recommended. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Julie. Can I invite questions from members? There are no questions. There are. One from Councillor Samuel. Are you there, Councillor Samuel?
Sorry, I was in mid-flow there. I didn't realise I was muted. You hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yes.
Okay. Just referring to the representations, there's 2 letters of objection, and just a little bit concerned that they're talking about frequent alarms going off and sounding in false alarms about processes that are going on there. Have any comment on that? Has it been looked into?
Hello. Yes. We noted the objections. They relate to the existing operation of the plant as opposed to what's proposed here. Yeah. And I don't know if Environmental Health wish to comment on any issues concerning noise or any of the objections raised, and whether they've had any complaints relating to that at the current site.
Hello, it's Frances McLean here. Basically, the alarm is something that they have to test. It's because they're under the health and safety. They've got an emergency plan, and they have to test the actual alarm. That's something I'm aware of that they have to do, and they will obviously have an alarm if any sensor, if an emission gets too high, they would probably have an alarm going off. If there was any issues like that, we would discuss that with the actual company to find out what the issues were, and they would remedy the problem.
Any specific complaints apart from that, are you?
I'm not aware of any recent complaints.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Francis. I have to say that's one of the most reasonable explanations I think the committee's received as to why there are frequent alarm sounds. Are there any other questions? There are no other questions. Can I invite comments, please? In the absence of comments, I think we can move to the vote, and the recommendation is that permission be be granted subject to the conditions. Sorry, Councillor Green wishes to comment. Councillor Green, if you're speaking, we're not hearing.
Just to add my a few comments, I do support this planning application. The company bends over backwards. It is actually now a British company at long last again. And I do think there are some developments here which are really important in terms of the future and tackling climate change in terms of how we dispose of things. The company are a very good company with the neighbours. If there is any problems, they will speak to local people. They do give out warnings if anything's going to happen. They always respond. I've never had any problems. If there's been a problem, I've just gone to them straight away and they've responded. So in terms of being a good community company, they do fulfill all of those recommendations. So I do support this. I think it's something which we should welcome for the future.
Thank you. That's a good endorsement. Councillor Samuel.
I'll take my hand down again, sorry.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We will now move to the vote. And as I said earlier, the recommendation is that permission be granted subject to the conditions. So can I ask Michael to once again take us through the vote, please?
Councillor Barry.
4.
Councillor Brady.
4.
Councillor Burdis.
4.
Councillor Dark.
4.
Councillor Graham.
4.
Councillor Green.
4.
Councillor Lott.
4.
Councillor Richardson.
4.
Councillor Samuel.
4.
Councillor Wheatman.
4.
It's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you for that. And we can now move on to the last item on the agenda, page 149. It's a tree preservation order. Who's taking us through this one, please?
I am, Chair.
Right.
Thank you.
Carry on, Julie.
Members are requested to consider the representations submitted in relation to a tree preservation order at 11 East Farm Mews at Backworth and consider whether to confirm the order. I'll go through the slides. So this shows where the tree is. It's obviously marked there at T1. Basically, the council were informed by the owners that they were considering felling this sycamore tree due to the concerns of the tree causing damage to their property, and the council decided to make a tree preservation order for the tree. Next slide, please. I'll just take you through a few slides. It's not actually where the red dot is. It's further, yes, and it's in that corner there, which is being highlighted there. Next slide, please. Got a 3D, well, another closer up view of it. Next slide, please. And just an image of it in leaf. I'll take you through a few more slides. Next slide, please. That shows it obviously in winter. The photo has been cropped because there was a person in which I had to crop out of the photograph. Next slide, please. This is submitted by the objector. So we've had one letter of objection from the owners of the property, and this is set out in full in the agenda, along with photos that they have submitted. And this is just a selection of a few of the photos that they have submitted. But as I say, members will have had the opportunity to read their comment in full, along with the photographs submitted. Their objections, to summarise, relate to the potential damage the tree could cause, it having limited amenity value in terms of limited visibility in the street scene, evidence of disease and impact on owners' health. The council has responded in consultation with the landscape architect, and those comments are also set out in the agenda, which members will have had sight of. The objection from the owners basically refers to the safe planting of a tree and the tree size in relation to the property distance. So just to summarise, then, the tree is older than the building, and the foundations would have been designed that accommodate the presence of the tree. And this development and many other sites in the borough do contain mature trees that exist in closer proximity to existing dwellings. And any problems with overhanging can normally be addressed through standard practices such as thinning or crown lifting. And there is no legislation as to the presence of an existing tree in relation to urban garden size. And obviously the TPO will ensure that any pruning works which do need to be undertaken are not detrimental to the tree and are undertaken in accordance with the approved standards. In deciding whether to impose a tree preservation order on the tree, a site visit was carried out and an evaluation of the tree was undertaken, and it was found that the tree was healthy and it did contribute to the amenity of the conservation area. The sycamore tree is approximately 14 to 15 metres high, with a large proportion of its crown visible to the occupiers of certain properties in East Farm Mews. The tree also has some views from the public highway of East Farm Mews, and it does form a larger collective from longer distance views as well with other trees. The TPO will ensure that the works undertaken are carried out in accordance with good arboricultural practices, and obviously it doesn't prevent future works from being undertaken, but those works would need the approval of the local authority beforehand. The sycamore tree is considered to be in fair condition, reasonably healthy with no major defects. It's got high amenity value, and the order has been made in the interests of securing the contribution this tree makes to the amenity value of the area, and members need to decide whether they wish to confirm the order. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move to questions. Councillor Barry.
Has the resident submitted any damage to his property caused by that tree? I couldn't find anything.
No, I don't believe that they have specifically, but they have set out in the which is in the agenda, just the full objection, which does set out various documents that they've submitted. So, and obviously members will have had sight of that. So we've commented, well, officers have commented on those various issues that have been raised. I think, like I say, just in terms of potential damage to the tree, and I mean, they've referred to some evidence of disease at the tree, but from our examination and site visit, it was considered that the tree is in reasonable health, and as we say, does contribute. What the tree preservation order would mean, though, that is any works, the applicant could still apply to undertake certain works with any further relevant evidence that they wish to submit, and then that would be considered as part of a tree preservation order application.
Okay, thank you. No one else has indicated they wish to ask a question. Can we move to observations, comments, please? Right, no one's indicated they wish to comment. Can I advise the committee, because as this isn't a planning application, we've actually got three options which are set out on page 156 of the report. One is to confirm the TPO with no modifications, and that's what's being recommended by officers. The second option is to confirm the TPO with modifications, and because there's been no observations, I suspect that is not necessarily one that we would be voting for. The third option is to not confirm the TPO. So unless I'm advised otherwise, can I suggest that we vote initially on whether to confirm the TPO or to not confirm the TPO? So Michael, can you take us through that vote, please? And the response is confirm or not confirm. Thank you.
Okay, so the options we want to hear from members is to either confirm or not confirm. Councillor Barry?
Confirm.
Councillor Brady?
Confirm.
Councillor Burdis?
Confirm.
Councillor Dark?
Confirm.
Councillor Graham?
Confirm.
Councillor Green?
Confirm.
Councillor Lott?
Confirm.
Councillor Richardson?
Confirm.
Councillor Samuel?
Confirm.
And Councillor Wheatman?
Confirm.
That's 10 votes to confirm and none not.
Thank you. And now can I just invite members, if anyone wishes to add any modifications to our confirmation of the TPO, can they indicate? There are no indications, so that order is confirmed with no modifications. That concludes the meeting of the Planning Committee. Thank you very much. Can I thank members and officers for attending, and any members of the public who are still with us, well done, you deserve a medal. So that's the meeting over. Thanks, folks.